Hello students, welcome to lecture number 13 of Computer Architecture course. Today's topic is processor memory bottleneck. It is a very important lecture that actually helps you to get into the memory topic after you've learned about the data path architecture of processors. In today's lecture, we will talk about the interfacing between a processor and memory. What is the basic bottleneck problem that the people in the processor and memory industry faces? How can we resolve that problem? And we will also talk a little bit about the different type of memory technologies that are in the market today. We'll also see the different types of memory before we can delve into the memory architecture in the upcoming courses or upcoming lecture. Okay, so let us get started. Okay, so let me start by giving you some idea about what is the difference between DRAM and SRAM. So DRAM stands for dynamic RAM. It contains instructions and data of program capable of providing random access to any memory location. While on the other hand, SRAM stands for static RAM that contains instructions and data using latching circuit to store each bit. It is faster than DRAM but is volatile. That is, the data is lost when the memory is not powered. Another significant difference is that it is more expensive than DRAM and it is thus not used in the main memory of personal computers. Okay, so one of the applications of static RAM could be cache memory, okay, which you will learn in the upcoming lectures of this course. So you see basically two major differences. First, it is in the architectural side, that it uses latching circuit to store each bit. Second is in terms of the volatility, that is, it is faster than DRAM but is volatile. And third is the design cost, which is the expense. Okay, so SRAM is certainly more expensive than DRAM. So what is the architectural side of DRAM? DRAM requires additional circuit for refreshing purpose in order to retain the data. Okay, so this is done by rewriting the data to the modules per millisecond. For example, rewrite could be 100 plus times every second in case of DRAM. Another important thing to note is that DRAM consumes higher power than SRAM because you need an additional circuit for refreshing purpose, and because of the writing that happens multiple times every second, so it certainly consumes more dynamic power than SRAM type memories. And as I said, SRAM data is available as long as the power is on. Okay, so therefore it is volatile by nature. Now let us have a look at the processor memory bottleneck. So what is the concept behind it? So let us first try to understand that the improvement rate in the microprocessor speed by far exceeds the one in the DRAM memory. Okay, so that is the reason basically behind the bottleneck. That is, the improvement rate in the microprocessor speed is multiple times higher than the improvement rate of the DRAM. So the first reason is the division in the semiconductor industry is different for microprocessors and memory. So we have different industries for microprocessor and we have different industries for memory. So they, both are not manufactured and designed by a common industry. So this has resulted into a consequence that their technologies are heading into different directions, or they have rather headed into different directions, especially in the past. The focus of the microprocessors was always on speed, while the focus of the memory was always on the capacity. Okay, that is how much of data we can store inside a particular device. While that was never the focus for microprocessors, because we were always focusing on how fast we can make a microprocessor work. So you see that the objective of it was totally different. One was focusing on the speed, the second was focusing on the capacity. So let's see a small example. For example, if the improvement rate is 60% per year in case of microprocessors performance, and the improvement of access time for DRAMs is 10% per year, so you can imagine that how the performance gap will grow exponentially. Okay, because one is heading in terms of improving the performance, other is heading in terms of improving the capacity or the reduction of the access time. So this is basically the memory processor bottleneck that I am referring to here. Let me also take a hypothetical example. For example, we want to design a hypothetical computer with the following specs. Let's say the processor operates at 800 megahertz. So I'm just taking a rough example of Pentium 3, and let's say it is connected to a memory through bus which is 100 megahertz. Let's say it's SDRAM PC100, which is the name of the bus. So what happens now? This means that when the processor operates at 800 megahertz, what I'm basically trying to say is that the processor manipulates 800 million items, which is instructions and data, both together or individually, per second. Okay, that is, the processor is manipulating 800 million items per second, while the memory achieves a debit, which is sending or receiving of 100 million items per second. This means that for every single memory access that is happening, 8 processor cycles have elapsed. Okay, this way 7 in 8 clock cycles are actually wasted waiting for the items from the memory, because the processor is faster and memory is slower. Okay, it's very obvious that you can understand from this example. So this highlights the discrepancy that exists among the processor and the memory, and this is basically the processor memory bottleneck problem that is highlighted through the concept that I have spoken about here. Now let us have a look at what we can do in order to eradicate this problem. Okay, but before we can do that, let us first understand few parameters of processor memory interfacing. Okay, these are not specifically parameters only for processor or for memory, but they are rather combined parameters for the processor memory interfacing. So therefore, the performance of processor memory interfacing is characterized by 2 parameters. First is latency, which refers to the time taken between the initiation of a memory request by the processor and its completion, and bandwidth, which is the rate at which information can be transferred to or from the memory system. So the ideal scenario is, of course, we should aim for maximum performance, and that is only possible if you could have zero latency and infinite bandwidth, but that is of course practically not possible. Right? So let us see what are the techniques to reduce latency. So latency reduction, first is we can do that by decreasing the time between issue of a memory request and return of the needed operand. Okay, so if you can reduce the time that happens between issuing a memory request and returning that needed operand to the processor, then we can certainly reduce the latency. The second is latency tolerance. So this is a little bit concept that is related to parallelism. So that actually says that if you keep performing other computation while the memory request is being serviced, so you can actually inhibit the latency problem that you see. So basically the memory latency for the request is partially or fully hidden if you keep doing other things in parallel. When the time the initiation of the memory request is done by the processor and the needed operand is returned back to the processor. So between this period, let's do more things in parallel so that we are not able to realize the time that is being spent for the latency. So that way the latency can be tolerated. But as I said, latency reduction is not really easy. Okay, so let's see what else we can do. So the use and success of these techniques also expose the bandwidth limitation. Okay, as I said, if you try to do latency tolerance, you're trying to do things more in parallel. If you try to do more things in parallel, you're actually exposing the bandwidth limitation because you're putting more load on the bandwidth. So the reason is because they speed up the instruction rate, because if you want to do more things in parallel, you need to fetch more instructions and then decode them and then execute them and then write it back and so on. So you actually speed up, you're doing the speed up of the instruction rate. Second is the necessity of the operand also grows, so you need to operate on the register file, you need to access the data memory. So these could result into several sort of structural hazards or data hazards that you've seen in case of pipelining. They also require more items that are effectively needed while increasing the memory traffic. So you're putting more load on the memory, so memory traffic is increasing. The fourth is that the bandwidth capability is exposed. So the incapability slows the response time to the processor requests, thus indirectly again affecting the latency. So as you could see, this due to this complex interaction between the memory latency and the bandwidth, it is challenging to judge whether the performance degradation is due to the memory latency or due to the insufficient bandwidth, which also affects the latency somehow, right? So since we do not know what exactly is the reason why this bottleneck is being created, it could either be because of the memory latency or bandwidth or a combination of both. So therefore we judge it as a complex interaction. It's very challenging to exactly pinpoint and say, okay, this is a problem and we need to do this. So therefore the memory industry has made some efforts to improve the bandwidth problem so that it can match up with the processor. Okay. So let's see how we can do that. So the first thing is to use something known as synchronous DRAM. Okay, in short known as SDRAM. DRAM stands for dynamic RAM, as I told you. So synchronous DRAM is one of the ways to work around the problem. I'll tell you how. The second is something known as double data rate DRAM. Okay, it's known as DDR DRAM, double data rate DRAM. So these two are the possible solutions to circumvent the problem. Now let me first talk of synchronous DRAM and let's see how this helps. So DRAM, when it is synced with the system frequency, that is the DRAM can operate at the same frequency as the processor, is known as synchronous DRAM. Okay, and this synchronous DRAM, SDRAM, can be of four types. The first is SDR based, which is single data rate based. Okay, and the second is dual data rate based. So dual data rate can again be further classified into DDR1, DDR2 and DDRN. And DDRN is for the current state of the art technology, it could be 3, it could be 4. So it could be DDR3 or DDR4. We haven't been to the stage of DDR5 as of now commercially. So the deployability has so far been restricted to DDR1 to DDR4 for DDR category of SDRAMs. But for the SDR, we just have one category, which is SDR SDRAM. And what is this SDR? It is actually responsible for transferring the data once in every clock cycle. So therefore it is known as single data rate. Okay, so you can see from this diagram that we are basically trying to transfer data once in every clock cycle. Okay, while for DDR we are actually able to transfer once in the rising edge and second in the falling edge. Okay, so not once but twice every clock cycle we are able to transfer the data. So therefore DDR has higher transfer data rates than SDR. Therefore it is twice the bandwidth as SDR at the same clock frequency. So therefore at the same clock frequency, DDR provides higher performance or better performance than SDR. So it's because of the higher data transfer rates, because we are transferring data twice every clock cycle compared to once every clock cycle in case of SDRs. Okay, now let me talk about the DDR SDRAM parameters. Okay, this is very crucial. So first parameter is known as peak bandwidth. It is also referred to as burst rate. So what is peak bandwidth and how is it mathematically defined? The DDR SDRAM peak bandwidth can be given as the combination or multiplication of the memory bus clock rate multiplied by data transfer per clock multiplied by memory bus interface width multiplied by number of interfaces, which is also equivalent to the DRAM clock frequency multiplied by the data rate multiplied by the number of bits transferred multiplied by the number of channels. Okay, now let me take you through one example. This is for Intel's LGA platform or NVIDIA's GeForce platform. The DDR SDRAM that they use is, for example, having a memory bus clock rate of 100 megahertz, which is the DRAM clock frequency. The number of bits transferred rather is 64 bits per second, and the IO bus clock is 100 megahertz. Okay, so using this information, how do we calculate the peak bandwidth of DDR SDRAM? So if you put this information into this formula, in case of DRAM clock frequency you put 100 megahertz, which is 100 into 10 to the power 6, multiplied by 2, which is the data transfers per clock, because this is dual data rate, so it's 2, multiplied by the memory bus interface width, which is the number of bits transferred, which is 64 bits per second, and multiplied by the number of channels. So in case of regular DDR, it is single channel, so it's 1. So by computing this information, you get 1600 megabytes per second. Okay, so that refers to the peak bandwidth or the burst rate of DDR SDRAM given by the following specification. Now let us see what is the next parameter. The next parameter is known as transfer rate. Okay, so any type of SDRAM that you see in the market in the current technology, they are always identified by two parameters. First is the burst rate or peak bandwidth, and second is the transfer rate. So first thing you've already learned. Now let's look into the second parameter. The transfer rate is given by the following. It is referred to by the IO bus clock, which is the clock external to the memory and used between the memory controller and the memory. Okay, I'll show a diagrammatic view of what I mean by this when I say clock external to memory and used between memory controller and the memory. And so therefore by this if you have going by the definition, so IO bus clock is 100 megahertz, for example, given by the specification. That means that there are 100 million rising edges per second and 100 million falling edges per second. Okay, therefore for DDR, which is dual data rate transfer, there are 200 million transfers happening per second. So therefore it is given as 200 MT per second or 0.2 GT per second, giga transfers per second. So therefore the technical naming convention of SDRAMs is given as DDR-200 slash or and PC1600. Okay, so this PC1600 refers to as the burst rate or the peak bandwidth, and DDR200 refers to as the transfer rate in terms of MT, million transfers per second. Okay, other examples could be DDR2800 and PC6400. We can do similar examples to find this out. So let's see how that is evaluated. The data I showed there is for DDR2 SDRAM. So far we were talking of DDR SDRAM, now we are referring to DDR2 SDRAM. So as again, DDR2 SDRAM peak bandwidth can be given as the memory bus clock rate multiplied by data transfers per clock multiplied by memory bus interface width multiplied by number of interfaces, which is equivalent to the DRAM clock frequency multiplied by the data rate multiplied by the number of bits transferred multiplied by the number of channels. So given by the spec that you have, which is the memory bus clock rate is 200 megahertz, the IO bus clock is 400 megahertz, and the number of bits transferred is 64 bits per second. Okay, now since it's a DDR2, so we frequently see the application of DDR2 based systems as memory installed in pairs, okay, to run in dual channel mode. So they always have two channels basically, so they are always installed in dual channel mode to increase the memory throughput, that is the number of bits transferred per second to be higher compared to normal DDRs. So they are always used as pairs basically in dual channel mode. I'll also show one diagram to make you understand what this using in pairs basically mean. But as of now, let us focus on computing the peak bandwidth given by the following spec. So you've put the 200 into 10 to the power 6 in place of DRAM clock frequency multiplied by 2, which is the data transfers per clock multiplied by the number of bits transferred, which is 64 bits per second, multiplied by the number of channels, which is 2. So on computation we have 6400 megabytes per second. Now this is the one that I was showing in the previous slide. Similarly, the transfer rate can be obtained as from the IO bus clock, which is 400 megahertz, given by 400 million rising edges per second and 400 million falling edges per second. So that is equivalent to 800 million transfers per second happening, because the data is being transferred in the rising as well as in the falling edge. So that gives you 800 MT per second, which is equivalent to 0.8 GT per second. So the technical naming convention becomes DDR2 800 and PC 6400. So here 6400 refers to the burst rate and 800 refers to the transfer rate. Now let me show you one diagrammatic understanding of how we can analyze DDRs. Okay, so let's see the first diagram. So inside the memory we have a memory array and an IO buffer. Okay, so imagine for DDRs, if the frequency, internal frequency is 200 megahertz, and since it is transferring 2 bits of information, because at the rising and falling edge, 1 bit in every edge, so it is like 2 bits for rising as well as falling edge. So therefore, in order to meet the external IO bus frequency of 400 megahertz, the internal data path of the memory has to work at 200 megahertz, so that we could synchronize with the external IO bus frequency and transfer the data to the memory controller. So in order to match the IO interface frequency 400 megahertz, the internal data path has to work at 200 megahertz, such that 200 megahertz into 2 bits gives you 400 megahertz. Okay, 2 bits of information is being sent per clock cycle. Okay, so that becomes 200 bits being sent per cycle, or in total cycles per second. Similarly for DDR2, since we have 2 channels, so we can assume a 4-bit prefetch, and that gives you to make the internal data path to work at 100 megahertz, because we want the external frequency to be 400 megahertz given by DDR2 400. That's the IO bus frequency. So for that to happen, we need the internal data path to work at 100 megahertz, so that we could transfer this 400 bit information. Similarly, the DDR3 transfers data at twice the rate of DDR2. So therefore, if the external frequency, IO bus frequency is 400 megahertz, so we need to make the internal data path to work at 50 megahertz, which is that we are transferring twice the number of information as in DDR2. So 4-bit becomes 8-bit, so it's an 8-bit prefetch that's happening, and because of that we can ensure that the internal frequency works at 50 megahertz, and we can transfer 400 bit information across all cycles per second. So this is an example or diagram that I was referring to. So dual channel, as you can see, the single channel has 1 slot or single pair of or single memory, and dual channel has 2 memories, so they work in pairs basically. So that's why they're installed in pairs to run in dual channel mode. So you see that in dual channel we have 2 channels because of 2 memory cards that are installed, and quad channel has 4 memory cards that are installed. Okay, so that's why it's known as quad channel, because the number of channels or the number of interfaces that is working with the processor is 4 here in this case. Okay, so we are done with today's lecture. As you have seen that you've learned about the different aspects of memory. For example, starting from SDR, starting from the difference between SRAM and DRAM, application of SRAM and DRAM. You've also seen about the different types of DDR memories that is existing, from DDR1 to normal DDR to DDR2 and so on. You also have learned about the different parameters, such as what is the difference between peak bandwidth and the burst rate, and you've also seen how is burst rate different from the transfer rate, so on and so forth. Okay, in the next lecture we will focus on the memory architecture and try to see how a cache memory looks like. Thank you so much.